Greetings! I am Herbert, and today, by patron vote, I'm going to build this Zvezda Matador truck. This is a 15mm or 1/100th scale snap-together plastic wargaming kit. These are generally pretty cheap little kits, so they're good for filling out your army. I figured it might be a good cheap option to give my British force a bit of mobility. We can't have them wearing out their little legs now, can we? As we can see on the back of the box, there are 3 images of the completed model at different angles, and a bit of information including the part count, which is 21 parts, and the length of the vehicle being 6.1 centimeters, which is a bit over 2 inches if you use backwards measurements. Inside the box we find this leaflet. On one side it has information about Zvezda's game Art of Tactic, and the other side has the instructions. These are pretty simple and basic, which is fitting. Like most of these 15mm scale Zvezda kits, this should be a nice simple model to build. The model comes on 2 tan-coloured sprues with enough parts to build a single truck. These are bare-bones kits, so there is very rarely any extra detail parts or options. That's not really a problem, especially considering the low cost. The parts on these sprues are quite nice and neat. The level of detail isn't what you would call high, but what is there looks pretty good. If you've bought a cheap kit in a tiny scale like this one, you shouldn't be expecting a hyper-detailed display piece anyway. There are of course mould lines, and they're most prominent on the wheels, though they really are quite minor and should be no issue to remove quickly. The second sprue has a bit of a bend to it, which isn't really ideal, but I don't think it will affect the parts that much, if at all. This is obviously a snap-together kit, so you don't need to use glue, but I'm going to. The glue I'm using is Tamiya Extra Thin. I'm expecting this to be a quick and easy build, so let's begin. I start by building the cab, because that seems like what the instructions want, and I would never rebel against the instructions, would I? I first slot the cab front part on. This is obviously quite easy. Before gluing, I add the cab right side. It goes on easily, but the way it wants to sit naturally leaves a little bit of a gap at the front, which we don't want. I take care of that by adding glue and pressure until the part is nicely bonded into place. Once it's bonded, I add the left side of the cab. This fits much better. There's no gap, which is nice. It's a pretty neat looking cab. There's no roof yet because that part includes the roof for the rear compartment as well. I set the cab aside and then begin turning all of these parts into the cargo holding part of the truck, and I guess passenger holding part too. First, I add this T-shaped bracing part. This is keyed so it only goes on one way. There's a surprising lack of internal bracing parts in this kit. These Zvezda kits are usually full of them. At any rate, I try to line this part up nice and straight to make adding the rest of the parts easier. Then come these, what appear to be seats. These are structurally important, so you might as well put them in even if you don't think they'll be visible through the windows. Next comes the rear wall. This goes on really easily. Once I'm happy with how it's lined up, I add glue. It would make sense to then add the walls. You can see these slot onto the pins on the T-shaped part and the seats. I found I had to apply a little bit of pressure here. It's a bit of a tight fit. Tight, but good. I add glue, and then comes the other side, which goes on pretty much exactly the same way. It needed maybe a bit more pressure, but it goes on nicely too. Looks very cargo compartment-y. I then add the mudguard part. This goes on the bottom here, obviously. I don't know where else it could go. There are guide pins which make this very easy to install. I then attach both of those assemblies to this frame, starting with the rear compartment. Unsurprisingly, there are guide pins and corresponding sockets to hold this together. You can imagine this is in no way difficult. The cab goes on just as easily. I add glue to the areas where the cargo area meets the back of the cab, and then to make sure it doesn't bond just slightly out of position or anything annoying like that, I add the roof part. There are 4 guide pins for this and it goes on pretty easily, though there are a couple of slight gaps around it. Nothing a bit of pressure can't fix, though the rear left corner did look a bit janky. It could be worse, and for the price you can't complain too much, especially since everything else fit together so nicely. Now it's time for wheels. It's not going to be much of a truck without wheels. The front and rear wheel sets are different parts, so do pay attention to the instructions. First are the front wheels. One of the hubs was a bit miscast here, but I suppose that could be hidden with mud or something. It should look more like this one. The wheels slot onto the axles as you might expect. Nothing too tricky here. There is a slight amount of play in it, so make sure you've got them on nice and straight. This is the axle for the rear wheels. As you can see, it's quite different to the front one. Assembly is the same as the front ones though. No problems here at all. They can then be glued into place on the bottom of the vehicle, because that's usually where the wheels go. Except for spare wheels, I guess. Those don't always go on the bottom. Whatever. I add extra glue where the leaf springs contact the frame, and obviously I'm making sure to put the front and rear wheel sets on the correct ends of the truck. That's very easy, and would you look at that? The Zvezda Matador truck in 15mm scale is now complete. Hooray! The model is actually a bit bigger than I was initially expecting it to be. Not that that's really a problem at all, it does look like it would have been a hefty vehicle in real life, just I was expecting it to be a bit smaller, like the other 15mm scale trucks I have. I think it looks pretty good. It went together very neatly, except for a couple of gaps and that bit of miscasting on the front right wheel hub, but it's pretty good. And it was fun and fairly quick to build, unsurprisingly. You could probably build 100 of these in an afternoon. Okay, so that might be a slight exaggeration, but it's a very quick and easy build. I only bought one of these to test it out, and I think I will pick up a few more. I mean, surely one isn't enough to carry an army across the battlefield, even if it is big. I don't actually know how a vehicle like this would work or what it can do in Flames of War. Surely they can carry infantry, and maybe they can tow guns. I'm assuming that's the case, but I've not looked it up at all. It's nice to have them on hand anyway, no matter what they do. As I mentioned earlier, the detailing isn't the most impressive. You would certainly be doing it wrong if you bought this kit expecting that. But for what it is, a gaming piece, it's a perfectly serviceable Matador truck. It's clearly identifiable as such, and once it's painted up it should look pretty decent on the gaming table. I won't be painting this until I get a couple more of them, so if you'd like to see that you probably shouldn't hold your breath. But do let me know in the comments if that is something you want to see. Also let me know what you think of this model in general. Have you built it yourself? Do you prefer some other Matador truck that's available in this scale? Post in the comments below. And if you haven't already, why not sub here on YouTube, join our excellent community on Discord, follow me on social media and all those other things. If you really like what I do, please consider supporting over on Patreon, or perhaps by purchasing a shirt or mug from my merch store. Links to all of those things are in the description below. And as always, I shall return soon, so until then, be excellent to each other and thanks for watching. Farewell.